Okay, welcome to the Lighthouse Tele-Support calls. Today we're going to be having a guest speaker, Judith Millman, who will be talking about traveling with your low vision child. And she's going to be giving us lots of good tips and ways to decrease stress. And Judith has been working in the field of vision rehabilitation for most of her professional career. She was retired from the Lighthouse as the vice president for the Hudson Valley after 30 years of service. She has been facilitating the CVI Tele-Support group for well over 100 participants since the inception of the program about 14 years ago. She also facilitates the Tele-Support group for parents of children with rare genetic diseases in her spare time. And I'll let you tell us all about yourself if you want to add something to that. But thank you very much for presenting today.
Well, thank you, Sheila, and hi, everybody. Yeah, I can't believe that it's been about 15 years since I've been facilitating the Tele-Support groups for CVI and for actually for Leber's congenital amaurosis, which is the rare disease group that I work with. And it has been a great pleasure to be dealing directly with parents after many years of having a more administrative job in the Lighthouse and Lighthouse Guild, although I started as a social worker part-time and wound up being full-time and a half as the head of the Hudson Valley region of the Lighthouse. So I've really enjoyed my contact with parents of children with these two different and very different conditions, and still keeping a finger in the field and you know, retaining a professional interest. So I'm very happy to be talking about traveling with your blind or low vision child. And Sheila, you can do slide 1 if it's not up yet. So what I wanted to start off by saying is that the stress that parents have when thinking about traveling with blind kids is really not that much different than the stress that they may have in thinking about traveling with their typical kids. There are so many logistics to considering taking a trip, and they may be a little bit different for blind kids and for typical children, but you know, travel often equals stress in the minds of parents who are already busy and stretched to the max. So I have two kind of sayings when you think about traveling or starting to travel. And the two hints that I would suggest or pieces of advice are: be flexible, and nothing goes exactly according to plan. So slide 2. So travel strategies may be different for children with ocular blindness and children with CVI, which is a neurological condition, as well as children with other disabilities or concurrent disabilities, such as maybe mobility impairment or autism. So you know, that's a caveat that there will be differences, and there's no one strategy for all kids with vision impairment. So I think in getting started to think about planning a trip, I would say plan. Get organized very early. Prepare your kids for the trip by discussing where they'll be going, providing verbal descriptions, perhaps making a tactile map of the destination. This is, this is, I'm sure every parent is aware of this. Carry snacks, carry medicines, prepare, bring with you comfort objects, toys, books, whatever will make it easier on the child to be in a different environment. And start out with the idea that you can and you're allowed to take it slowly. You won't be able to see everything. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about traveling by air, traveling by rail, and traveling on, by car on a road trip. So those are 3 modalities that we'll just cover. And the thing about air travel, it's often the most convenient way to travel a long distance, whether you're going to visit a theme park or visit family on the other side of the country or take a vacation. To families with children who are blind or have a vision impairment and other disabilities, flying can be extremely anxiety-provoking. And I'll just say, by the way, there are plenty of people who are stressed out by the thought of flying, even if they're doing it without children or without children with any disabilities. Some parents have actually described having panic attacks just contemplating air travel with their children. So changes, be aware, changes in routine, being in unfamiliar environments can all be very disruptive and difficult for some children. But there are strategies that make air travel easier to deal with. Again, including describing what will occur at the airport to your child well in advance, role playing, and of course, packing those familiar toys and snacks. So next slide. For air travel, if possible, book your flight with your children in mind. That might be trying to book a flight with as few stops as possible. And in some cases, if it's a long flight or an overseas flight, some parents have tried to coincide their flight with their children's bedtimes. So, hopefully that a child can sleep throughout most of the flight. Then, of course, arrive early at the airport, just to, again, lessen stress. I do this myself, even when I'm just traveling with my husband, or even if I'm traveling by myself. I would rather wait an extra hour at the airport than be sitting in traffic, wondering if I'm going to make it to the airport in time to go through security, etc. So one thing I learned in my research is how helpful TSA can be. TSA has developed something called TSA Cares, and that's a helpline for travelers with disabilities. So TSA agents have received special training to provide specific information about the screening of travelers with disabilities. We suggest that you call the TSA helpline, and you'll see that at the end of, during the last slide, but the telephone number is 855-787-2227. And if parents call that line with questions 72 hours before traveling, that they can be very helpful. If you provide TSA Cares with your flight itinerary, they can assist parents, with having somebody there to help them when they get off their flight. So that the agent, the TSA Cares agent that you speak to, will notify TSA officials at the airports to allow them to prepare for your screening before your flight and to assist you through the process. So TSA Passenger Support Specialists, they call them PSSs, will assist passengers with disabilities and other medical conditions, and more than 4,500 TSA officers have received training to serve as PSSs. And parents can request one of these PSS personnel from a checkpoint officer or a supervisor. So the TSA Cares program, it doesn't exempt you from the screening, but it the PSS can help you get through the process much more seamlessly and with a lot less anxiety for both parents and children. And anecdotal reports on the TSA Cares program have been really positive. So I would urge anybody to avail themselves of it. One of the parents that I spoke to recently mentioned something interesting. She has a child that travels in a wheelchair, and she said that if you go through the airport with your own wheelchair, that does not help you get through the line quicker. That in order to get priority in going through the line, you must use a TSA escorted wheelchair rather than your own. So that's good to know. Next slide, please. So this one I called Airlines Can Help. And they can, and they will try to be helpful as far as they can. When you make your reservation, make sure you mention your special needs. Airlines have wheelchairs, they call them aisle wheelchairs, for transferring non-ambulatory children to and from their seats on the plane. Those are available. Most airlines offer pre-boarding for passengers with a disability who need extra time or assistance to board or stow accessibility equipment or to be seated. So let the airline also know if you need help and a wheelchair at either your destination or if you have to make a connection. And connections can be very stressful. Sometimes schedules don't, if a schedule doesn't work exactly the way you thought it would be, planes can be delayed, and if you don't have a lot of time to make your connecting flight, you can, if you have the trams waiting for you when you get off your flight to take you much more quickly to the connecting flight, that can be helpful, and you can ask for that. But certainly to make sure that you have wheelchairs at every end where you might need them. And again, avail yourself of pre-boarding and make sure to take advantage of the extra time that you need to get on the flight and to stow any of your equipment and to make sure your wheelchairs, your personal wheelchairs are tagged and getting on the flight with you, even though your personal wheelchairs can't be used to go down the aisles. They're too wide. So next slide, please. So I don't have too much to say about rail travel, but reservations can be made on Amtrak for blind passengers and those who need extra space for wheelchairs or accessible seats. There's a number that they have you call. I think this is just for reservations, 1-800-USA-RAIL, which is Amtrak, and you certainly should let your the booking agent know what kind of special service requests you might have. And I think they will try to help you insofar as possible. So, next slide, please. I call this How to Survive a Road Trip. And that may be the most common kind of traveling people do with their kids. And again, surviving a car trip can be equally stressful with sighted kids or blind kids, but there are some strategies. Again, share the plan with your kids. If it would be helpful for your child, map it out. If your child uses a tactile map, they can follow the trip with a tactile map. You can let them know where you are if you're going to different states. It could be a very interesting and learning situation for them. Any parent of a child, I'm sure, knows, create a travel bag with activities. It could be braille cards, it could be an audio player, toys, electronics, sensory activities, an iPad, an iPod, whatever is going to work for your child. If you're going to any kind of a historic destination, whether it's, the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, Mount Rushmore, the Golden Gate Bridge, you can get replicas of those buildings or those, bridges or whatever from local gift stores. I'm sure it's something you can get online in advance, and that way your child can tactily get a sense of what this site will look like, where they're going. It will give them a sense of what they're going to be, where they're going to be visiting. With any site that you're going to, if it's a tourist site, ask about accessibility accommodations. Ask about verbal descriptions. Is there an audio descriptor of, the site, whether it's a museum or the Statue of Liberty? But because many of the tourist destinations do have recordings with verbal descriptions. Ask if there are opportunities to touch a landmark, and sometimes they have that also. I think it's often helpful if you're, especially in a crowded space, to make sure your child is using his or her white cane for identification if they're cane travelers. As far as what to do and what your itinerary is going to be, whenever possible, if your kids are of the the right age, let them choose some of the activities according to what their interests are. Some parents with car trips will travel at night so that a child, especially a young child, will probably sleep for most of the trip. And, as ever, have plenty of snacks available. And one of the pointers I read was, this is not the time to just concentrate on nutritious snacks. So even though we may all do that as a matter of course in our everyday life, when you're on a road trip with a possibly cranky kid, maybe that's not the right time to be insisting on that. So snacks, snacks, snacks. And next slide, please. So I decided to include a little bit about Disney World because in talking to the parents on my groups, it seems that much of their travel, when it's long distance, is going to Disney World. And everybody, that seems to be where all kids, if you ask them, where would you like to go on a family vacation? Disney is right up there. So I have heard parents in my group talking about their experience at Disney, and as I'll mention shortly, Disney does have a lot of good accommodations that they make can make life easier when you're a Disney visitor. I personally think Disney is overwhelming to anybody, but they can make it a little bit easier. But I had one parent who adamantly said, I am not going to use any of the accessibility features of Disney. We're going to stand online just like everybody else. I know my child has to live in the real world, and this is a way to drive that home. Well, most parents don't feel that way. And if they can make it a little bit easier for their child, they certainly want to do that. So even before you get to Disney, when you're planning it, you certainly can contact their disability services. And there's a phone number, and that's 407-560-2547, or by email, disability.services@disneyparks.com. So that you can do in advance, and they will probably send you some material that lets you know on the types of services that they do provide. They have audio descriptions. They have Braille guidebooks. They have portable tactile maps that you can carry with you. They have stationary Braille maps throughout the park. They have visual disability services at most of the activities. So it's always good to check out their website, which is http://disneyworld.disney.go.com/wdw/index. But this will be on the last slide with the sources. So they have a lot to offer, and in terms of help for parents who are traveling with blind children. Next slide, please. So now you're at Disney. You have arrived. What to do? On the very first day, it's strongly suggested that you stop at guest relations, get an official Walt Disney World guest assistance card, which will outline any assistance you may need while visiting the park. And it identifies that you have special needs. You can also pick up the guide for persons with disabilities for information aimed at guests with disabilities. And once you have the card, ask every cast member at the entrance to each attraction where the handicapped entrance is. This is a really good tip because the handicapped entrance is almost always shorter, less winding, and allows you more time to access, the ride or the space that you're going into. So I think that probably is one of the best tips that I can give you. Another tip is do not expect to see everything. The park is huge, and there's so many things to see. And maybe this is something to do in advance with your kids. Pick out what is most important to you. You're not going to be able to see everything. So maybe if you have several kids in your family, have each one pick out what they would want to make sure that they see. It's also helpful if you can plan your visit to Disney during the slow periods at the park. Not during Christmas week or not during President's Day week. Sometimes it's not possible to do that. If possible, get to the park early and stay later. This doesn't mean that you should get there when it opens and stay till it closes. Many families find that it really helps everybody if they get there early, but go back to their hotel for afternoon rest and then go back to the park later on. And because the earlier and the later times are generally much less crowded. So my final thoughts are plan, prepare, share with your child, and relax. Have fun. And again, remember, you're not going to be able to see it all. So on the very last slide, I have the sources of some of the pointers that I've mentioned, and we have the TSA Cares Helpline and Disney's website. So I think that these sources you can check on your own and get even more information than I was able to tell you. But hopefully this will get you started. And this is certainly a time of the year that travel may be on many people's mind. We're looking at the period between Thanksgiving and New Year's is often a very busy travel time. People go home to family at different parts of the country for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or Hanukkah. So I think travel may be on a lot of people's mind, and hopefully this was timely and hopefully a little bit helpful. So I know we have lots of time left over, and Sheila, your suggestions on where we go from here?
So I have a comment.
Go ahead. I was going to open it up for comments.
Okay. I'm sorry. I got a little a bit ahead of you. But okay. And I know you talked a lot about wheelchairs, and they're great for people that need them. But even today, when you deal with TSA, they're not totally sensitive to the fact that everything is not resolved with a chair. People don't always need that. People may need an arm or or something else, or a little those little carts that they take you from point A to point B. It's very humiliating to ask a blind person that walks everywhere and travels everywhere, oh, you need to sit in a chair because it's easier for us. Well, guess what? It's not easier for me, and it's not. It doesn't meet my needs. So
well, that's a good point, and I would hope that doing that call before you travel and calling TSA Cares and explaining what you do need might alleviate that.
Well,
it's not a.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and many times they'll show up with one chair, and then when they see that my husband and I are both visually impaired, they say we need another chair. And then I say, well, you don't need any, so let's just travel with you by a sighted guide. So there's a little more education that needs to take place with these sort of things, because I know that chairs are wonderful, but not for everyone.
Of course. Good point.
Very good. Any other people have comments that might be helpful for others to know with their travels, or people they know?
Yes, I think that the same way Disney has a disability service, most of the amusement parks have them. I know places like Six Flags and the zoos. They, it's good to not, to check, because they probably have some kind of services. So some of them might be more limited than others, but they're pretty good about servicing visually impaired or any other disabilities. So I would suggest not just limit, calling Disney. If you're going to an amusement park, a zoo, checking with them.
Oh yeah, I think I had tried to cover that and saying that so many museums and parks do have special accommodations for different disabilities. Yeah, absolutely.
The museums in New York are very good about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And other parts of the country that I have been to as well. I'm thinking about a museum that I visit with my grandkids in Charlotte, North Carolina, and museum in Oregon. I have seen the accommodations that they make. So again, if you have the luxury of planning your trip in advance and giving yourself enough time to check this out and to make those contacts, it will certainly make your trip go smoother.
Yeah, and
I have a question.
With okay, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. You go.
Also with the theater and movies, many of them now offer audio describe, and also if you go to the theater and they don't happen to have it, you can go on this app called GalaPro, and many of the theater performances are on GalaPro, and once you sign in, you can listen to the audio description as the play is going on.
Oh, that's great to know. How do you spell that?
GalaPro, GALLO, GALLOPRO.
That's great to know.